World shares are mixed and U.S. futures fall after a tech-led rally on Wall Street. Add AP News as your preferred source to see more of our stories on Google. Add AP News on Google. Add AP News as your preferred source to see more of our stories on Google. Share BANGKOK app. World shares were mixed Friday and U.S. futures decline as optimism over the U.S. Iran deal to end their war was dimmed by the postponement of high-stakes talks on reopening negotiations over Iran's nuclear program and getting oil moving through the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. markets will be closed Friday for Juneteenth. Planned talks in Switzerland between Iran and the United States over their efforts to reach a permanent end to war were delayed, while Israel's military said its forces struck targets throughout southern Lebanon overnight as Hezbollah reported intense fighting in the area. Both sides are trying to show some good faith, Bas van Geffen of RaboResearch said in a commentary. But even if the water appears calmer, there is still a strong undertow. The agreement remains fragile on multiple fronts. Germany's DAX rose 0.2% to 25,079.30, while the CAC 40 in Paris was nearly unchanged at 8,467.75. Britain's FTSE 100 shed 0.2% to 10,376.64. The futures for the S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average were down 0.2%. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 wavered between gains and losses, but closed 0.3% higher at a new record of 71,250.06. The government reported that consumer prices excluding volatile fresh foods was unchanged, but analysts said it would likely pick up in coming months despite higher fuel costs. Higher inflation was a factor driving the Bank of Japan to raise its benchmark interest rate earlier this week to a three-decade high of 1% as it gradually adjusts its policies after years of near zero or negative rates. Read more in South Korea. The Kospi lost 0.1% to 9,052.42, just shy of its record set a day earlier. The S&P/ASX 200 in Australia declined 0.9% to 8,828.70, while India's Sensex lost 0.8%. Markets in Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Taiwan were closed for the Dragon Boat Festival. On Thursday, stocks rose on Wall Street, erasing most of their losses from a day earlier to notch weekly gains thanks to big advances for heavyweight technology companies. The decline on Wednesday was driven by anticipation that the Federal Reserve will likely raise interest rates this year in an effort to fight inflation. The S&P 500 rose 1.1%, and the Dow Industrials added 0.1%. The Nasdaq Composite surged 1.9%. Sign up for Morning Wire. Our flagship newsletter breaks down the biggest headlines of the day. Email address sign up by checking this box. You agree to AP's terms of use and acknowledge that AP may collect and use your data pursuant to our privacy policy. Technology stocks had some of the biggest gains and the most influence on the broader market's rise. Intel surged 10.6% after U.S. President Donald Trump announced that the semiconductor giant will make chips for Apple in the U.S. Other big semiconductor companies gained ground. NVIDIA rose 3% and Micron Technology jumped 8.7%. On the losing end, SpaceX fell for the second straight day since its big debut on the U.S. stock market last week. The Elon Musk-led rocket maker and AI company was down 3.6% following a 4.9% loss Wednesday. Oil prices wavered after the United States and Iran signed an agreement to end their war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz to oil tanker traffic. Brent crude, the international standard, spent most of the day lower before settling 0.4% higher at $79.85 per barrel. U.S. benchmark crude fell 0.2% to $75.85 per barrel. Early Friday, Brent crude was down 0.4% at $79.50 per barrel. U.S. benchmark crude was flat at $75.85 per barrel. Prices for crude oil are still above roughly $70 per barrel from before the war, but are well below the $100-plus price from a few weeks ago. Rising energy costs have been putting more pressure on already hot inflation. The average price of gasoline in the U.S. has dipped below $1 for a gallon, but is still 25% higher than a year ago. Prices have been rising for a wide range of goods because of higher shipping costs. The Federal Reserve kept its key interest rate unchanged this week, but hotter inflation means it will likely raise rates by the end of the year. Lower interest rates make borrowing easier for businesses and households, spurring growth, but they also tend to stoke inflation. In other dealings early Friday, the U.S. dollar fell to 161.31 Japanese yen from 161.38 yen. The euro was unchanged at $1.1458.